So the consumable stores on hand are subtracted in the income statement. They reduce the value of expenses, and yet they increase the profit. Okay. Now today we're going to discuss the cost of sales. Now let me do a revision on how we calculate the cost of sales using the periodic inventory system. We take the opening inventory, we add the purchases, we add any carriage costs. By carriage cost, we're referring to shipping fees, carriage on purchases, delivery fees, freight in, import duties, custom tariffs, any carriage cost, any cost that is incurred for bringing goods within the business premises. And then we minus the purchases returns, we minus the settlement discount received, and then we minus the closing inventory. That's the basic formula for calculating your cost of sales. Now, this is an example. We are given the opening inventory as 2,000, the purchases as 2.5, the carriage on purchases as 340, the closing inventory as 1,000. Now, the sales amount is 5,000. The required part says calculate the gross profit. Now, to calculate gross profit, it's either you take your revenue or you take sales minus your cost of sales. You're going to get your gross profit. Now, this is the calculations for cost of sales. We took the opening inventory of 2,000. We added the purchases. We added the carriage on purchases, and then minus the closing inventory. Now, the cost of sales, they amount to 3,840. Now, confirm my calculations, please. Confirm if my calculations for cost of sales are correct.
They're correct, sir.
Yeah, they're correct.
It's correct.
Okay, now we can work out. Now we can work out the gross profit. We have sales. We have sales. We are given sales as 5,000. The cost of sales are 3,840. What will be the gross profit? Sales is given as 5,000. The cost of sales we have just calculated, it's 3,840. What will be the amount for gross profit?
1160.
1160.
1,160.
Any questions based on the cost of sales?
It's clear, sir.
No questions.
Now, let's move on. When it comes to the closing inventory, closing inventory is subtracted from the calculations of cost of sales, as you have seen in the previous example. Closing inventory are always subtracted. Cost of sales is an expense, and the closing inventory, it reduces the value of this expense. Just like consumable stores on hand. So it's the same. we said that the consumable stores on hand reduces the value of an expenses. It's the same because the closing inventory is subtracted from the calculation of cost of sales. That means a closing inventory reduces the value of expenses as well. If the value of closing inventory is not considered, profit will be less. In other words, if you don't reduce the expense, profit will be less. So the value of closing inventory, it reduces an expense account, which is cost of sales. So it works the same as the consumable stores on hand. So the closing inventory, it reduces the value of cost of sales, which is an expense. Consumable stores on hand also, it reduces the value of expenses, which is your stationery, packing material, and cleaning material. Now, what if we omit the amount of closing stock? What if the amount of closing stock is not calculated? This is an example. On the same example we had, the opening inventory is 2,000, the purchases is 2.5, the carriage on purchases is 340. Now, can you see that in this example, I did not include the amount of what? Of closing inventory. The question is, what if we omit the amount of closing inventory? What's gonna happen? Cost of sales amount will increase, an expense will increase, and yet your profit will decrease. Cost of sales account, which is an expense, will increase, an expense will increase, and yet the profit will definitely decrease. Any questions, please, before we move on?
No.
In this example, the amount for closing inventory is not included. So I'm saying the cost of sales amount will increase because why? Remember, the closing inventory is subtracted. And if you omit your closing inventory, your cost of sales account will increase. It means your expense account will increase. And what will happen to your profit? It will definitely decrease. Any questions, please? Now, let's do the calculations. Can you see now that the profit had decreased? The cost of sales increased, which is an expense, and what happened to your profit? It decreased. So in this case, your cost of sales will amount to 4,840. Now, what happened to the value of the profit? It declined. It decreased because why? We have omitted the value of the closing stock. Any questions?
No, sir.
Now, let me go back. Check in this example.
Sorry, sir. Just maybe a question.
Yes, please.
No, I was gonna ask when you say when we omit, will this be maybe mentioned in the question if a question like this comes or what?
All right, we'll get there now.
Okay.
Now, check in this example. The closing inventory was calculated. It was 1,000. How much is the cost of sales? 3,840. Look at the profit, it's 1,160. Look at the cost of sales, it's 3,840. Now, in this example, check there's no closing inventory. How much is the value of your cost of sales? It's 4,840. How much is your profit? It's 160. Cost of sales increased because we have omitted the closing inventory. And what happened to the profit? It decreased. Now, this is an example from the June exam, question 6 of 20. It says Zayola has prepared his financial statements for the year ended 31st March 2020, which show a profit for the year of 30,000, current assets 234,400, and the total assets figure of 710,500. He has since discovered that the inventory figure he used was understated as he left out the closing inventory value at 10,100 from his workings. So what happened? He did not calculate the amount of closing inventory. And if you do not calculate the amount of your closing inventory, your expense, which is the cost of sales, will increase. But what will happen to the profit? It will decrease. Now, the question says, which one of the following statements is true regarding the correction of the error that was made? Now, after rectifying this error, what's going to happen? Now we are given the first option and it says the revised current assets figure will be 224,300. Now the second option says the revised profit for the year should be 40,100. Option 3, the revised total assets figure will be 740,500. Option 4, the value of closing inventory does not affect the profit for the year or net assets. And then the last option, it says the revised non-current assets should be 746,100. What is the correct option? Guys, are you still there?
I'm here, sir.
Okay.
So I'm not sure, because obviously, I mean, should we even consider the statements with assets, because assets are not necessary? Maybe are we supposed to be even looking at that?
Looking at what?
Like where it says like statement A and B and C, they mention assets. Is that not maybe already something that tells us it's not right?
All right. Now, with this question, we need to focus on what we just discussed in terms of the closing inventory. What effects does the closing inventory have on your profit if it's not calculated? Now, let's quickly go back to what we have discussed. Now, in this example, I said, if we omit the amount of closing inventory, cost of sales will increase and expense will increase, and yet your profit will decrease. Now, check on this example. You see here we have omitted the value of closing stock in this example. Now, when we rectify this error, check here, You see here the value of closing stock is considered, the 1,000. Now this is the rectified solution. When we consider the amount of closing inventory, check what happens to our profit. It increases. The profit is 1,160 when we consider the closing inventory. But if we don't consider the value of closing inventory, the profit decreases. It's 160. Now, what will happen to the profit if we consider the closing inventory? Will the profit increase or decrease?
Decrease.
The profit will increase.
It will increase.
It will increase.
It will increase.
The profit
40,100.
will increase. The profit will increase. Now, from 30,000, we're gonna add the 10,100. Now, let's go back again. Let's go back. Check here. Check when we consider the value of the closing inventory, the profit increase. The profit is 1,160 when we deduct the amount of closing inventory. So by deducting the amount of inventory, it simply means you are reducing your expenses. It's the same as consumable stores on hand. When you consider the amount of consumable stores on hand, it means you are decreasing your expenses. And when you decrease your expense, it means you are increasing your profit. You see in this solution, the closing inventory of 1,000 is subtracted. Now what happens to the value of profit? It increases. It's 1,160. But now, in this example, check the amount of closing inventory is not considered. And what happened to the profit? It decreased. So if you don't consider the amount of closing inventory, your profit decreases. But once you consider, once you rectify, once you fix the mistake of the calculation, once you consider the amount of closing inventory, your profit increases. Now the question, it says, the value of the inventory was left out. It was omitted. Obviously, if it was omitted, the profit will decrease. Now the question is, which one of the following statement is true regarding the correction of the error? Now that you have noticed that you did not calculate your closing inventory, what will happen to your profit? These are the options. The revised profit for the year should amount to 40,100. So it means this amount of 10,100 will be added to the profit, because why? The closing inventory, it decreases the value of expense and it increases your profit. So once you make corrections, once you fix your error, your revised profit should increase. It's the same as the consumable stores on hand. The consumable stores on hand, they decreases your expenses and yet they increases your profit. So with closing inventory, it's subtracted from the calculation of what? Of cost of sales, which is an expense. So it's the same as you are reducing your expenses. When you reduce your expense, your profit increases. So in this example, the closing inventory of 10,100 was not considered. And remember, on the previous example, once you omit the amount of closing inventory, your profit decreases. But once you fix, once you reverse, your profit increases. Any questions?
No, sir. So the answer is
No
B, right?
questions.
The answer is B. The revised profit for the year should be 40,100. Why? Because the closing inventory, it increases your profit. It reduces your expense. Same as consumable stores on hand, they reduces the expense and yet increases your profit. If you check on these examples that we discussed, let me quickly go back. You see here the amount of closing inventory was not considered. That's why the profit is low. It's 160. But when you go back to this example where the closing inventory is considered, the profit is high, is 1,160. Why? Because cost of sales, it's an expense. So by deducting the closing inventory, it simply means you are reducing your expense. So when you reduce your expense, your profit increase. 1,000 was subtracted here, and the cost of sales amounted to 3,840. The profit increased. The profit was 1,160. But now in this example, the closing inventory was omitted. What happened to profit? It decreased. This example says closing inventory was not calculated. So what will happen to profit? The amount of profit that is shown there is low. Because why? The value of closing stock was not considered. So the correct option here is option B, because why? The revised profit for the year should increase from 30,000 to 40,100. Any questions?
No, sir.
Any questions, please?
Mshasa,
Yes.
good evening. I'm not sure if it's my speaker or what, but you are too soft. I can't hear you properly.
Others? Are you also facing the
I
same
can hear you
problem?
from my side.
I hear you well on my side.
I am good on my side.
All good this side.
I'm okay on this side.
I can hear
Okay.
well the side.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, how do we conclude on this one?
I think I can hear you
In conclusion, if the closing inventory was not
I can
calculated,
hear, but I think my screen is stuck on.
okay. If the closing inventory was not calculated, it means the cost of sales amount is more. Cost of sales account will decrease and the net profit will increase. We need to increase the profit by 10,100. Because why? Cost of sales account will decrease and then the net profit will increase. The cost of sales account will decrease by 10,100 and the profit will increase by 10,100. That's it for today's, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much.
Thank you.